Okay, welcome to this Django crash course. I want to show you what we're going to be making. This is a favorite movies app, so you can see there's a list of movies. You can click on a movie to get more details. You can delete a movie. You can add a new movie. So we could type Goodfellas and say mob movie. Create that. We can view the details, go back, again, delete a movie. So it's going to be a full stack app with all of these features, so stay tuned, and by the end of this video you will have this created. Okay, so let's dive into making it. So the first thing to do is make a new directory, an empty directory, cd into it, and open it in an editor. I have Visual Studio Code here. Here's this blank directory. So if you haven't done that, stop and get that set up. And then we want to, in the terminal or command shell, check what Python version. So here in VS Code, if you click Control apostrophe, you can open and close the terminal, toggle terminal right here, see? And then we can check which version of Python with Python -- version. So you see I have 3.8.10. If I do py -3.8 -- version, I can get the version of specifically for 3.8, but if I try 3.10, Python -3.10 -- version, I also have 3.10.5. So if you have multiple installations of Python and you have Python 3.3 or later, you can use that whatever version you want to specify. So I'll be using Python 3.8, but I think anything above 3.3 should work. So the first thing we want to do now is set up our virtual environment, which just keeps all of our packages and things we install housed, separated from the rest of our projects on the computer. So to do that, we can go py 3.8 -m venv virtual environment, and then the name, I'll just call it env, and click enter. And now you can see we get this virtual environment folder created. Okay, so now that we have the virtual environment, we want to activate it. So it's source env/scripts/activate. And I'm using git bash here, which is closer to the terminal, so what you would see on Mac. If you're using command line or PowerShell, it might be slightly different. I think it's just env/scripts/activate. So now that we have the virtual environment set up, we're ready to actually get started. So the first thing we can do is download Django. So we can say pip install Django, just like this, and this will download the latest version. So this will be Django 4. Okay, so now that's done, we can take a look at what we have installed. So if we say pip list, you can see the current packages that are installed, and that's within this virtual environment. So the nice thing is all of these packages are just in this virtual environment. So if we start a new project and we want to use Django 3, we can do that. And now that we have Django installed, let's create a Django project. So Django -admin start project, all one word. The name of the project, I'll just call this config, and then put a period so it just gets created in this current directory. Otherwise it would make another level of directories that I think is unnecessary. And now we can see that we have this config folder set up. So this is the project with the settings.py, and Django is comprised of one project and then multiple apps, which typically contain specific functionality. So the next thing we'll do is we'll create an app. So we go python manage.py start app, and then we'll call this movies because we'll be creating that movies list. So we click enter, and now this created this new folder movies, and you can see it's got a little bit more stuff than the config folder. And we have to do one more thing. Whenever you make a new app, you have to add it to the settings.py, so installed apps. So we'll open up the config settings.py, go down to installed apps, and then we'll add, I like to add a comment and say local apps, and then we just need to add the name of that app, so movies, and don't forget the trailing comma. Save that, we can close that out. And now we can try running the server and see what we get. So we can do python manage.py run server, And then if we click here, 127.0.0.1 at port 8000, so that's localhost 8000, that's where our server is running. And I bring this over into the screen. You can see, awesome, we get this Django rocket. You're successfully installed and working, so everything is set up correctly. So this is awesome. So the project is up and running. So the next thing we're going to do is actually return something. So let's just return, go back to the code and stop the server with Control C. So that'll stop the server. And then in the config, let's go to URLs and add another path. So this path is telling Django where to look in the URL and what to return. We'll explain this more in a sec, but we'll say include, which we need to import. So from Django.urls, import include. And then we're going to create this file in a sec, but we'll say movies-urls and save that. So this is basically just saying, and in the beginning we have to enter where it should look. So we're saying when it goes to an empty path, so mywebsite.com/nothing, an empty string, go to movies/urls. So make sure you save that. And then now we're going to have to create that file. So in movies, in the movies app, go new file, urls.py, and we'll actually just grab this URLs and copy and paste it over. So we'll go back to the movies urls.py, paste that over so we have a starting point. We don't need this admin, and we don't need include, and we don't need these two URLs. So we can just keep it like this for now. And now we're going to create our first view. So a view basically handles the logic, so what should be returned. So here we can say, we can just create a function, we call it index, and they take the request. So the request is the incoming request from the user. So the request, and we can just return for now an HTTP response, which we'll have to import, and we can say hello world. So we'll just get this set up, and now from Django.shortcuts, we also have to import that HTTP response. Save that, go back to the URLs, and now we have to tell Django when to run that view, that function. And so we give it this path function, and we'll say an empty string. So the first parameter is a route. We'll say an empty string, run, well, we need to import from views. So from dot import views, so from this base directory, import this views.py file, and we'll say views dot, and then it was called index, and then we can also name it, and we'll name it home. And naming will be very useful later on, but we won't worry about it for now. But essentially it's saying when the user types in home, the home route, run this views.index function, this index function in our view, and return whatever gets returned. So now we can try this. So let's go python manage.py run server. We'll run the server again. And we get an error. No module named movies/urls. Let's see. So include movies/urls. Let's see if we have it imported correctly. Movies include, I think it should be movies.urls, like this. So let's try that again. We can Control C to stop the server and run it again, python manage.py run server. And now everything seems to be working. So let's pull back up the app on the website and refresh, and beautiful, we get hello world. So now we are actually returning something to the user and seeing how we can handle going to a specific URL and getting something back. And now we probably don't just want to return text like this. We want to return HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, things like that. And so Django has this concept of templates, which are HTML files, and that handles kind of the display. what gets displayed here. So let's go ahead and set that up. So if we go back to the code, and we have to create a new directory and a new file. So in this movies app, we can go new file, and we can just type in the path and it will create the directories. So we'll say templates/movies/index.html and click enter. And you can see that it creates this templates folder and this movies folder. And this is just the base convention for these template files with Django. You can update this, but for now we'll just run with it. So it goes movies, templates, movies, and then the name of the file. And here we can just type HTML. So we could say h1 and then type hello world. So it looks a little bit better than our current hello world. And now we need to tell Django to use this template. So we can go back to the view. And right now we're just returning this HTTP response, but we see this render function gets included automatically. And so instead we can just return render. And the first argument here is this HTTP request, which we get passed up here. So we'll just pass that along. The next argument is this template name or string. And so it's movies/index.html. And then the third optional argument is this context. And so this is just a dictionary. We'll touch more on this in a second. But if we save that, the server is running, it automatically reloads. And we go back to the website and click refresh. Boom, now we actually get this styled hello world, and we could include anything here, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, a full page. But this is pretty boring. We probably want some data here, but this is just hello world. That's boring. So let's try and see how we can actually pass data in and view data. So if we go back to the code and we go back to the view, we can just for now create a variable up here and say my_movies equals, and this will be a list of dictionaries of objects, and it'll say title equals Top Gun, and maybe it has a description. So we'll give it a description, and we'll say planes and mustaches, and then we'll duplicate this. So Shift Alt down if you're on a PC, add a comma there, and we'll maybe say Lord of the Rings, and Frodo must destroy the ring. And we can pass this into this view here. So we can make a variable called context, and we can make this a dictionary, and we can say movies equals this variable up here, my movies. So we can grab this, and then here, instead of just passing this empty dictionary, we can pass this context variable, which all it is a dictionary that has these movies. And then within the template, so if we go back to index.html, we can include these tags that give us access to this data, this context data, and we can say movies because that's what we called it. So if we save this now and go back to the website, make sure your server is running and refresh this, well, we get this weird list. So we get the movies, but they're not really readable, and they're just kind of this list. So we can also do things in the template such as loop through. So these are things called tags. So we open them up with the curly braces and percentage signs, and you could say for movie in movies, and we have to close this for loop. So we open up the tag again and say end for, and then within this for loop we get access to all of the movies now. So we could say unordered list, and each list item could be movie, and we can access their properties like title. So now if we save this and go back to the website and refresh, boom, we get it's actually structured inside the HTML markup. So very cool. So now we're actually passing in data and displaying it and looping through it. And if we go and inspect page source, you can actually see that it's just the list item with the actual value. So there's not, that code just gets ran and then plain HTML gets returned. But again, we've just been passing this data in hard-coded, which is kind of cool, but not very cool. What we really want to do is pull data from a database or something, a third party, let users create data and things like that. So let's now set up our model to interact with the database. So if we go back to the code, when we created this app, there's this models.py file. So if we come here, and now Django works by abstracting the database layer onto this models.py file. So we can write Python here, Python classes, and they get turned in to the actual database files and tables and things like that. But we don't have to touch any SQL or anything like that, and we just write Python and we can switch out databases with less of a headache. So we already have this import here from django.db import models, which is a file, and we'll use that. And so to create a table, we just create a class, and whatever we name this is what the table will be called. So we'll call it movie, and we need to inherit from models.model, which we import at the top. And now every class variable we define here will be a field. So we could say we want the title of the movie, and we go models dot, and then there's tons of different field types that we can specify. We can say car field for a character field, and this needs to get a max length parameter, and we can just set it to 100. And we can make another one for description. So we'll say description equals models.char field, since it's another character field, another string field. And this one doesn't take any parameters, or there's nothing that's necessary. So now we have the model created. And actually, since this is a char field, it does also need a max length. So we'll just say for max length, we'll say, actually, you know what? We'll check out another field. So this will be a text field. Like this. And this one doesn't need any parameters. They're both storing strings, but the text field is a bit of a longer string. And just writing this models.py file doesn't actually do anything to the database. So with Django, we need to do something called migrations, which is common with other web frameworks, but it's basically telling Django, okay, now apply these changes we've made, this model we've created, to the actual database. And so we do that in the terminal, so we can stop the server. And there's two steps to it. The first one is we make the migration, so we make the file that kind of is the instructions, and then we apply them. So we say python manage.py make migrations, all one word, and click enter. And you can actually see this file. It said file created, create model movie. And if we go to the migrations folder in the app and we go to 001 initial, you can see this is the actual kind of instructions. So create model, name is movie, fields, and here's this list of fields, and you can see it automatically creates this ID field. We didn't have to specify the ID. So each entry will have an ID. There's the title and description, but we don't need to touch this file. We can close that out. And next we can tell Django to actually apply the migration. So we can say python manage.py migrate. And now we actually have the migrations applied. You can see there was a lot of other things that come kind of built in, and we'll touch on this admin stuff soon, but we can also see right here movies 001 initial, that was that file we just looked at, applied. And so now the database, which out of the box for Django is this SQLite, has been applied. But now we want to actually interact with the data. And so we'll take a look next at the Django admin and how we can view the data and create new data very easily and out of the box. So to do that, we'll need to run the server again. So python manage.py run server, get that up and running. And make sure that is checked out. Okay. And then we can go back to the website, and now we go to /admin. So Django comes with this admin site, but you see it's asking us for a login username and password, and we don't have any username and password yet. So we need to set that up now. So if we go back to the code and we stop the server with Control-C, we can create what's called a super user, basically an admin user, by going python manage.py create super user, all one word. Click enter, and then it'll prompt you to create this user. So username, I'll say DJVAC, email address, dom@sup.com, and then password, create the password, and then type it again, and you won't see the password show up. And now we have this created, the super user created successfully. So what does that mean? Well, if we go back and run the server again, python manage.py run server, and we go back to the admin, and we refresh, we can log in. If you hopefully remember those credentials that you just entered, we can log in and we get this cool interface, where we can actually interact with the data. So we see authentication and authorization, which comes with Django, and users, we see that user we just created. So you'll see your own user, which is very cool. But we don't see the movies. And so now the next thing we need to do is something called registering the movies with the admin. So go back to the code, and we need to tell Django, hey, show these movies in the admin. So we go to the admin.py, and there's this admin file that gets imported at the top, and we'll use that. We'll say admin.site.register, and then the model that we want. So we'll have to import that. So from this folder, import models, and here we can say models.movie. Save that. Basically, it's saying on that admin site, register this movie model. If we go back to the admin and click refresh, make sure your server is running. Now you can see we get the movies. So we can actually view movies. We don't have anything, so we can add some stuff. So we can add a movie. We can say Star Wars, lightsabers and the Force. We can save and add another. Let's just add a few. We can say Gladiator, Roman gladiator fighting. Save and add one more. We can say Lord of the Rings again. Frodo must destroy the evil ring. And then one more, we'll add Top Gun again, since it just came out, it's pretty good. We'll add the new one, Top Gun Maverick, and we'll say Rooster and his stash. Save. Perfect. And now we can see these movies, but they're coming up kind of weird. Movie object. So we're just seeing the movie object, but we really want to see something more descriptive. And so if we go back to the code on the models.py file, we can actually override a dunder method on this class. And so in Python, everything is an object. I don't want to get too deep into it, but everything is an object, and we can create a function def underscore underscore str underscore underscore that takes the self. And this is a dunder method, so it's built in, so anything in Python will get that. And off kind of default, it just displays that object that we just saw without being very descriptive of what it is. But we can override that here and return self dot whatever we want. So whatever we want from this class, so we can say self dot title. So that will return for this instance the title. So if we save that and go back to the admin now, and hopefully your server is still running, and click refresh, now we can actually see the title. Much more descriptive, much easier to interact with the data and read the data. And you can also do things in the admin like update things. Rooster and his stash and planes, and click save, or we could delete it. We'll just save this. Okay, so now we have these movies in the database, and we're accessing them with the admin, but we want to actually show them on the site. So let's go hop back in the code and hop back in the view. And we're going to want to get them on this home page, right? Right now we're just listing this hard-coded data, but we want to grab the stuff from the database. So all we have to do is we can delete this myMovies variable, and we can say from.models import movie. So that'll import that movie. And Django comes with something called their ORM, their object relational mapper, which basically lets us interact with the database, query the database, create new objects in the database with Python. And it makes it nice and easy, so we don't have to write SQL or specific database language. we can just write it all in Python, and if we want to change databases down the road, we can. So we can first just grab all the movies. So we can say my movies equals, and we say movie, so we say the object dot objects, and then we can do different things, like we can filter based on a property, we can get a single item based on a property, or we can also say all, and this will just grab all of the data. And now we already have this context variable, which is a dictionary, and it now, instead of passing in that hard-coded my movies variable, we have this data from the database. So if we save this, the server should still be running, and we go back to the app and go back to the home page. Boom, now we actually see data coming from the database. This is awesome. This is becoming more and more like the actual app, a real-world application. So this is very cool. But all we're doing now is displaying this list of movies. What if we wanted to see the description of a movie? Well, we would probably want to go to that specific movie's detail page. So we'll set that up now. So if we go back to the code, we can create another view in this view.py, and we could say it's a function, and it's called movie underscore detail, and it takes the request, and it also takes in something else, which will be a PK, the primary key. So the primary key for that specific movie, so that we can actually just get that one object. And so what we can say is movie equals movie.objects.get. So this will get one specific object, and we can go after its PK property, which is synonymous with the ID in Django, and it can equal this PK that we get passed in. So now we have this movie instance that we want to view. And so we can say context equals, we can create a dictionary, we can say movie equals movie, and return, we can render a template that first pass in the request, which we'll create. So we'll call it movies/detail.html, and we'll pass in the context. So we want to go back to our template movies folder, create a new file, detail.html, because that's what we specified in that view. And now we'll just say movie.title, and we will say in this paragraph tag, we can access the movie.description. Okay, so we save that. And now we need to tell Django when to run that view that serves that template. So we need to go back into the URLs file, and we can just shift alt down arrow to duplicate this. And we'll say this is at movie slash, and this is where we need to pass in some dynamic variable, that PK, to say, okay, we're going to be passing in the ID here. And so we can do that with these square brackets, and then int to specify what type it'll be. So it'll be an int, and then what the actual variable will be called. It'll be called PK. So this is saying at movie slash, for instance, 1, run views dot, and this was called movie detail. And for the name, we'll call this movie dash detail as well. Save that. If we go back to this site, and now we go to, make sure your server is running, and we go to movie/1, boom, we get this first instance. We get Star Wars, lightsabers, and the Force. We can go movies/2 and get Gladiator. Amazing. So now we can actually see the details, but we want to get there without typing it in here, because if you go to a normal website, you're not typing in everything into the URL, you're navigating with the page. So we'll update the home page to link to these pages. So go back to the index.html, and here where there's this movie title, we'll wrap this in an A tag. So we'll create this A tag, and we'll delete this and move this to the other side of the movie title. And then for this href, this is where using that name property in the urls.py came in. So right here, movies.detail. This is where it'll make it really easy. So here we can open up another tag, so curly braces %, and we'll close that out. And then in here we can just say URL, and then in a string, just pass in that name. So we'll just say it was called movie-detail. And it takes that primary key, which we can just access here by saying movie.pk. Save that, go back to the home page, click refresh, and now everything is linked to its detail page. So Lord of the Rings, Frodo must destroy the ring, Top Gun, Maverick, a lot of his mustache, Rooster. I would see it if you can. It's a great movie. And now the very last thing for this detail view is right now we are linking to the detail pages, but we're just clicking the back button. So let's just go ahead and add a little back button on the detail HTML. So in detail HTML, maybe right at the top, so above this H1, we can add an A link, and we can say go back. And this will be more practice for this URL tag. So it's open up a tag and close it, and then we say URL, and we pass in where we want to go, and I think we called this home, so save that. If we go back to the site, click Star Wars, now we get this go back, perfect, and that works. So right now we can see all these movies, we can view the details for our own, we can go back home, we can add movies via the admin, but we probably want to add movies via this website as well. So we're going to create some form so that we can create new movies. So let's go back to the code, and hopefully you're kind of getting the process here. This is kind of how Django works, the URLs, views, templates, and models. So we'll go back to the view, and we will create another view, and this function will be movie_create, and it'll take the request, and that's it. And here we're basically gonna render a form template. So we will return render, we'll say the request, and for the template we'll say movies-create.html. We can just pass in a blank context dictionary, not necessary, but we'll just do that. And next we need to create that create template. So I should have named it something else, probably my tongue twister. This is going to be tough to keep saying, but we'll create a new file, create.html, and in here we'll just render a form. So we'll say form and method equals post, which is, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on methods, but typically there's a post and a get method. So a get is what we've been using so far just to like get a web page, and a post is when you can actually send data. And the action is where it'll be submitted to, what URL, so we'll update that in a sec. But now we can add some inputs, so we'll say input text, and this will be title, and the ID will be title, and we'll give it a placeholder, equals movie title. And then we'll duplicate this, so Shift Alt down arrow, and highlight title, and click Control D to select the next occurrence of it, and click it again, and we can just say description. Okay, and now the last thing we need is a submit, so we'll say input/submit, and we can say the value is add movie. And the other thing is, if you go to this form and you don't want to add a movie and you want to go back, we can add a button down here or a link that goes back to the home page. So we'll open up those tags again, and we'll say URL home, and in the text we'll just say cancel, so it'll go back. So now if we go, we forgot one thing, so we need to tell the Django when to actually run that URL. So if we run that view, so if we go back to the URLs, we're going to want to duplicate this, so Shift Alt down, and this will just be movie/create, and we'll say movie create and movie-create. So now we can go to movie/create, and we should see that form. So if we go back to the app and we say movie/create, oh, we get this form here, movie title, movie description. So if we test it out and we say test, and we click add movie, we get this forbidden CSRF verification. And so CSRF is cross-site request forgery. It's a kind of malicious attack that Django wants you to prevent. So there's one thing we need to add that comes with Django. So if we go back to the create.html form, whenever we create forms, we need to pass in this CSRF_token. And this is basically just a random generated string that lets Django know, hey, I'm the one that made this request, that's making this post request, and it's safe. So now if we go back, make sure your server's running, go back to create, reload it, test2, and say test if we can spell, but we'll say add movie. And so it got submitted, but nothing happened, because now we actually need to tell Django how to handle this data. And before we do that, we want to specify in the create.html in the form this action of where to send the data. And so we'll say URL, we'll open up the tags, and we want to go to movie-create. So we will handle this in the same view that renders this form. And this is a common way of doing this. And we'll see how we can do that now. So in the views.py, under movie create, we want to say, basically, if it's a post method, so if it's a post method, if it is that form submission, then grab the form data and create entry in database. Otherwise, else just return the form. So we'll say if, so we'll say up here, if, and we have this request object, which we can get the method of. If request.method equals post, then we want to create the form data. So we'll say, so we'll grab the form data and create the entry in the database, excuse me. So we could say title equals request.post.get title, and description, highlight it, Control D, description equals request.post.get description. And the reason we use this .get is because this post variable is a dictionary, and we use .get to say, okay, try and get this item, but if it's not there, don't break, just return none. If you use square bracket notation and the title is not in the dictionary, then you'll error out. So now we're grabbing the form data, and now we want to create this entry in the database. So we use this Django ORM again. So we say the model, so movie.objects, and now there's this nice create function. And we can just pass in the fields that we want to use. So for title, we'll use the title. And for description, we'll use that description variable, like that. And then we also want to say, okay, we probably don't want to render the form, we want to take them somewhere. So we will import from shortcuts, redirect, and we can redirect the user to another page, and we'll just take them to the home page. So we'll return redirect, and we can just pass in the name of the URL. So if we go back to urls.py, we can say name equals home. We'll copy this and pass in home and save that. So it should say, okay, if it's a post request, then grab the form data, the title and description, and create a movie entry in the database with those details, and then bring us home. Otherwise, if it's not a post, if it's a get request, we'll just say, then return the form. So now let's go back to the site and try this again. So we'll refresh this page. We'll just refresh it up in the URL so this form doesn't get resent. And we'll say movie title, Goodfellas mob movie. And we'll click add movie. And boom, that works. And we can click Goodfellas and see it and go back. Amazing. So now we're actually able to update the database from the site and retrieve the data and view specific details. So this is becoming pretty much a full stack app. The only thing we'd want to do is delete items. So say we don't really like Star Wars that much anymore and we want to delete it. We would do a similar process to what we've been doing. So we'd go back here and create another view, and we could say movie delete. That gets the request. And this one will get the PK again because we're saying delete a specific movie. So we need to figure out which movie they want to delete. And here we can say try, and we can try and grab the movie. So we'll say movie.objects.get PK equals PK, what gets passed in. And then we want to delete that. And we can actually chain these commands together. So we can say just .delete. And that'll delete it. Accept. And so if we're not able to get this movie, that means the PK is invalid. It's going after a movie that doesn't exist. So PK is 120 and we only have 10 movies. Then that's not going to be an actual movie in the database. Then we want to return HTTP 404. And we can pass in the message and we'll say movie not found. HTTP 404, a 404 response is like an object not found, resource not found. So we have to import that, so it gets imported from HTTP, import HTTP 404. Otherwise, if this does succeed, this try, then we can return a redirect back to the home. So we can say, once you delete it, just go home. We can set this up in the URL. So when we want to go to this delete URL, we can duplicate the movie detail because it's going to be very similar. So we'll just say /delete. And then we can pass in movie delete view and name it movie delete. And then when we want to call this is when we're actually in the detail view. Maybe at the bottom here, or we'll do a HR, so a horizontal rule, so a horizontal tag. And then here we can create a link that goes to that URL of movie-delete, and it takes in the movie.pk, and we close the tag. And then we can make this a little button, and we'll just add a little bit of styling. We'll say delete movie, and we can just add some inline styling. We could say style equals, and this is just going to be color, so the font color will be white and the background will be red, so it stands out a little bit because we're going to be deleting it. So if we save that and we go back to the application and we go to Star Wars, now you can see we get this go back or delete movie. If we click delete movie, now it's gone. I realize now that we have hello world up here, so let's just update that quickly to be in the home page to be my favorite movies. But amazing, so now we basically have all of the functionality. So if we go back to the application and we refresh this, we have my movies, which is a list of my favorite movies. We can view one, go back, view one, and delete a movie. The only other thing we need is to actually let some way to get to the create form. So if we go back to the index page here and we say below this for loop, we say create. So we'll pass in here another URL and it'll be movie/create. And we close the tag and we say, we'll make this another button and we'll say add movie. And we make sure the server is running, go back and refresh the page, and we go to add movie. Now we can create a new movie. So if we say, I don't even know, we can pass in Star Wars again, lightsabers and the Force, click enter, and we get that entry. So amazing. So this is a full stack app. If you are looking for user authentication and stuff like that, I have another series that goes into more detail on all of these concepts. Check it out. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can get notified when the next one comes out.